Hi there, Year 11, and welcome back to school. Well done on coming back in after 5.5 months. We've made a really good start in our lessons for Macbeth. Over the next few weeks at home, you need to take responsibility for revising and refreshing your knowledge of an inspector calls. And we're going to start that together today. So we are going to explore a question that is very typical to what the exam board may throw at you. So this is the question we are going to look at. To what extent does Priestley present Mrs Birling as an unlikable character? Write about what she says and does in the play and how Priestley presents her in the way that he writes. So this will always be a 30-mark question for your content plus 4 marks for your spelling, punctuation and grammar. We're going to unpick this question together over the next few weeks, and you are going to put together your written response to this essay question. You're going to hand it in to your English teacher before half term, and we're going to mark these and give you detailed feedback. Okay, so let's look at this question. There's Mrs Birling, Sybil Birling. To what extent does Priestley present her as unlikable or dislikable? And there is a right answer. There is only one way, one right way to answer this question. And to understand that, we need to look at how Priestley presents her right from the start of the play. So at the bottom of my screen, you can see that these are the stage directions. The stage directions that Priestley uses to introduce Sybil Birling to his audience. We learn that she's about 50, a rather cold woman, and her husband's social superior. So right from the start, we're told that she's cold. That's not a way that most of us would want to be described. And it doesn't make her seem very likeable. So right from the start, Priestley sets her up to be dislikable. He sets the audience up to not like her because she's cold and she is superior. But why? Why does Priestley do this? Does he have a personal vendetta against Mrs Birling? No. So why does he portray her to be so dislikable right from the start? So we need to think about what Mrs Birling represents. And these on the screen now are all the ideas that Mrs Birling embodies and represents. She's upper class. She's from a well-bred old family. Because of her wealth and her social position, she is very privileged. She's also very prejudiced. She judges people. She particularly judges people in the working class. She's wealthy. She's married to a capitalist, and the family are very orientated towards making money. She's part of the older generation, a generation that Priestley saw as being incapable of change. She also represents, as we'll see today, old ideas, traditional thinking, old-fashioned thinking. She's an arrogant rich woman, and she is a social snob. So these are all the things that Mrs Birling embodies and represents. And in Priestley's view, Sybil represents everything that was wrong with society. Priestley, as we know, was a socialist. He felt that society was too divided by the class system, that the upper classes held all the wealth and all the power, and the working classes, things were very unfair for them. They were discriminated against. There was no equality. So to Priestley, Sybil is abhorrent. She is highly dislikable. She represents all of the things that Priestley himself was against. He was against all of these things. He felt that they were bad concepts, bad things in society. So what's Priestley saying? He intends us to dislike Sybil from the start. He sets us against her, and the way he does that is that he uses characterization and other methods to make her highly dislikable, really unlikable for his audience. So let's have a look at the evidence. Let's have a look at Sybil in action at the start of the play. So we've got this moment here where Mr Birling makes the social faux pas and he thanks the cook. Tell cook from me, very nice, good dinner too, Sybil. And Sybil reprimands him. She says reproachfully, if you reproach someone, you tell them off. And she says, Arthur, you're not supposed to say such things. Because we know that Sybil Birling is an upper-class, well-bred lady, whereas Mr. Birling is a self-made middle-class man. He doesn't know the correct way of doing things, and she takes this opportunity to reproach him, to reprimand him, and we see that she's a social snob. She is very concerned about appearances and correct behaviour. And she puts her husband right. So straight away, Priestley is showing Sybil to be pretentious and superficial. And as an audience, we really don't like her. We see her as a snob. We see her looking down her nose at people that she sees as lesser than her socially. And she does it to her husband. So the fact that Priestley shows her straight away to be a social snob is not going to endear her to the audience. It is not going to make us as an audience feel warmly towards Sybil. We dislike her from the start. Again, right at the start of The Family, we have her answering for her daughter. Gerald says, I've been trying long enough to be one of the family, haven't I? Sheila doesn't reply, and he says with more insistence, haven't I? You know I have. Mrs. Birling answers for her daughter. She smiles and says, of course she does. And we see here that Mrs. Birling is really controlling and domineering. And this is part of Priestley's characterisation. That's the method he's using here for Sybil Birling. We see that she answers for her daughter. She doesn't allow Sheila to answer for herself. This undermines Sheila, and it shows us that Sybil exerts control over the younger generation. She does it with Eric, and she does it here blatantly with Sheila by answering for her daughter. So again, we see her as controlling and domineering. That is not going to endear her to us. We dislike her. We are set against her from the start. And finally, at the start of the play, we have Mrs. Birling saying to her daughter, don't tease, Gerald. When you're married, you'll realise that men with important work to do sometimes spend nearly all their time and energy on their business. You'll have to get used to that, just as I had. So we see here that she is supporting and enabling this patriarchal system. In 1912, it was a male-dominated society. Men were very much in control. Men were allowed to go out into the workplace and have careers and jobs, and women were expected to stay at home, look after the children, run the house. And it's all part of this patriarchal system that kept women in their place, refused to give them the vote, kept them in the home. And we see here that Sybil is supporting and enabling that system to flourish. She's enabling the patriarchal system through her actions, through her dialogue with her daughter. We see here that she has a very old-fashioned attitude. She's basically encouraging her daughter to put up and shut up, to accept her position within the patriarchy, to accept her position in life and make the best of it. So we're going to be set against her. This is by writing it in 1945, where women were more liberated, and certainly in 2020, where women rightly have many more rights. We see her attitude as old-fashioned, we see it as domineering, we see it as manipulative, and we don't like her. We think, no, hang on a moment, why shouldn't Sheila challenge where Gerald's been? Why should she put up and shut up? But Sybil is part of that old system, that old patriarchal, old-fashioned system, and we dislike her for it. So let's reflect on what we've seen. Sybil at the start of the play. What is she like? A social snob who's overly concerned with appearances? An overbearing mother who answers for her children and is very controlling? A champion of the patriarchy. She has old-fashioned and bigoted views. So if this was a real person that was being described to us, someone we'd never met before, we might want to reflect what we'd think of someone who is a social snob, a controlling, overbearing mother, someone who is old-fashioned and bigoted. It isn't painting a very positive picture of Sybil Birling. And that's deliberate. Priestley is doing this deliberately from the start so that we, the audience, come into line with his thinking, and we also see that she represents everything that's wrong with society in Priestley's view. She represents the upper classes, privileged and prejudiced, wealthy, unaware and ignorant of what might be going on with the working classes. She represents this older generation who are stuck in their ways and fixed, part of the arrogant rich, those old ideas, so that we, like Priestley, dislike her from the start. Priestley makes her dislikable, therefore we dislike her. So right from the start, Sybil Birling is presented to us, so there is a right answer. If we are asked to what extent is she unlikable, dislikable, she's highly dislikable. She's utterly dislikable. And we've got here the evidence. We've got the evidence and the methods. Priestley uses stage directions and characterization. Stage directions in the first, characterization in all three. Characterization is the way a character is shown at that moment on stage. And this is the effect for us. We see her as cold, socially superior, someone who is condescending and highly dislikable. We see her as domineering. We feel really uncomfortable when she shuts Sheila down and silences her. And we realise that Sheila's very manipulated by Sybil. And finally, we understand as an audience that there are very different rules for men and women. And we dislike Sybil as she teaches her daughter to bow to the patriarchal system and just to accept her place within a very prejudiced patriarchy. So this is our answer. To what extent is she presented as dislikable? She is presented as thoroughly dislikable, highly dislikable. And this today we've had a little bit of revision on where we see Sybil presented as highly dislikable at the start of the play. Make sure that you have been making notes from today. You've been pausing the screen. If you need to go back and look at any of the moments, do so. This is information that you are going to need when we put together our essay response later in the half term. Thanks for your time today, Year 11.